right, let's go. If it decides it wants to work, that is. There we go. All right. So this is our lucky last. I know you've been waiting for it. Our last lecture, like mini lecture. These hopefully are small enough so that you can digest them and they're easy enough to understand, but not too long that it's too much of a drag to actually go on and watch them. So this is the last one. Now it's going to be on two different parts, so hopefully I can get through them, reasonably well. We have mitosis and meiosis, which we'll learn about what those are, and then we have the reproductive system, which is kind of the last one we need to touch on. We could talk about the nervous system, but the nervous system is more so covered in year 9, so we're going to leave that for then. The rest of it we've kind of covered quite well, in my opinion at least. Let's go. This is our learning intentions. We want to be able to describe the process of mitosis and where it occurs. We want to be able to describe the process of meiosis and where it occurs. The last one we want to be able to do is to be able to relate those two processes to how we operate as living and growing organisms. Why are these two processes really important? The last thing that we want to talk about is the implications of the reproductive system on these processes, and we'll find out about that later on as well. Stay tuned. All right, let's go. So we have a couple of key terms: mitosis, meiosis, chromosome, and cancer. Now, I'll give you a second to pause. I won't actually give you a second, but give that a pause. Write those boys down because they actually will pop up a couple of times in this presentation. So let's go next one. So before we get started, let's go over what DNA is. Now, you've probably been told about DNA. It's in your DNA. It is in your DNA that you're going to be like this, which isn't always true, but sometimes it is. Without overcomplicating things too much, we have this thing called DNA, which is short for deoxyribonucleic acid. And it's where your genetic information is stored. So there's a lot of it in your cells, a lot. If you were to pull out all the DNA and string it out, it'd be a couple of meters long in every single cell. So on the right here, we have a diagram, and this diagram here is a diagram or a model, or more of a diagram of DNA. And it's kind of like this ladder that's weirdly sort of shaped together, and it kind of spiralizes like that. Okay, kind of neat. Let's not overcomplicate things here. Secondarily, what's a chromosome? So without complicating things, that DNA, so that little double helix we call it, gets wound together. If we have a look at this particular diagram, I think it's really good. It goes through, it sort of winds together. It goes around these things called histones, which are kind of like, just little stone-like things where it sort of just wraps around. So imagine you have earphones, you have your finger, you wrap them around like that. Okay, so they kind of wrap around like that, and they sort of wrap around until we make these things called chromosomes, and they kind of look like little X's when they are what we call diploid, and when we call them, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Don't stress too much. We have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so 23 pairs times 2 means we have 46 chromosomes overall. We get 23 from our mum, we get 23 from our dad, and they're with us for the rest of our life. Okay, they all are a little bit different. I don't actually have a diagram of them, but if we were to show you what they look like, there's some that look like this, and then there's some that are a little bit shorter, some that are a little bit shorter. And surprisingly, you might have heard that you have an X chromosome and maybe you have a Y chromosome. If you're a female, you have 2 X chromosomes, which look like this. And if you are a male, you have a Y chromosome, which means if you cut out this little part right here, it looks a little bit more like what males have. And that's just on one particular chromosome. Chromosome pair, I should say. Okay, let's not complicate that too much. All right, mitosis. So mitosis. Imagine that you are walking into a hallway and you don't realize that your sister's there. She stands on your toe. And you say, mitosis. Okay, funny joke. All right, so mitosis is the process whereby a cell divides in 2. Now, it's kind of a strange process because the way that our cells multiply is actually through division. Okay, so don't think too much about the logistics of that too much. Basically, a cell works to duplicate all of it duplicates itself over a period of time. Then when the time is right, the cell divides. So over time, it's duplicating the DNA, it's duplicating the organelles, it's duplicating the just sort of everything within that cell. And once it gets big enough, it says, yep, we can divide. So we're going to divide right now. So it goes through this process called mitosis, and this is what it looks like. We have this process here we call interphase. We're not going to go into what they are because this isn't super important, but we have interphase, and that's when everything's being when everything is being duplicated. And then as we go through this process, you can see that they kind of line up. So if I have two chromosomes here, they line up, and then they are pulled apart and they go into two different cells. So two different daughter cells like this. So basically we start with one, it gets really, really fat, and then suddenly it goes, yep, we're good to go, and then it plops together into two different cells like this. And then they both go on to make big plumper cells as well. All right, specifics. So in mitosis, every cell is identical to the original. So they all start the same and they're all the same cell. Well, they're exactly the same. They have the same DNA, they have the same sorts of organelles, they are the same. Generally, your body is always working through mitosis because cells die off as they naturally do. But sometimes this isn't the case, and we'll get to that in a minute. So mitosis is primarily used for cell growth, repair, and maintenance. Okay, those are the three big things. There are big functions: growth, repair, and maintenance. It occurs in every single cell. We call these cells somatic cells. So somatic cells. They happen in every single cell except for sex cells. Each new cell has the full 23 pairs of chromosomes, okay? It doesn't go half, it has the full 23 pairs. And if you go onto the PowerPoint that I'll post, you can actually look up at this video and that'll give you a bit of a rundown of what mitosis looks like. All right, next one, meiosis. Meiosis is the process that eventually produces sperm in males and eggs in females. So adult males, they produce sperm constantly, whereas females are born with all of their eggs already there. So this already happened. This first stage of meiosis happens before you're even born, really. It happens when you're in the uterus, okay? For you girls out there. Whereas for boys, it happens much later. In meiosis, there's two stages. There's a diagram on the next slide that'll go on to that. The overall product is a cell with 23 chromosomes, but no pairs, okay? So it's just the 23 chromosomes. Each product cell has 23 chromosomes, but no pairs. So this is what it kind of looks like. Hopefully you can see my marker here. We start out with the top. We have an original cell, and then we have DNA replication happening. So you can see it kind of turns into two X's. Then we have crossing over happening. Now, we're not going to get into what crossing over is, but basically how your cells, they sort of just interlock to each other and they're like, oh, I like this finger. Oh, I like that finger. Let's swap them over. I'm going to swap them over and now I've got this finger on this hand and you've got this finger on that hand. By the end of it, they go through a sort of a mitosis dividing process and we get left with 8 different cells, and they're all different to the parent cells. None of those is identical to the parent cell. So this is how they're different to mitosis. In mitosis, they all come out identical. In meiosis, they all come out differently. So the specific, why on earth would it do this? Why would that be important? Meiosis is the process used to create diversity in our offspring. You and me, very unique. When two unique organisms reproduce, they're likely to produce an organism with a mix of traits from both mum and dad. And now this process in particular is really, really important for evolution. And you'll learn about evolution as we go along, but it's something to keep in mind. That diversity is really important. Where does it happen? Now, we're going to get into some diagrams, try not to laugh too much. Meiosis occurs in the testes, so this is the testes, in the male. So use your imagination as to what that is. That's where sperm is produced. And in ovaries, that's where the female sex cell is produced, in the ovary right here, okay? So let's just give you a really quick rundown of what those reproductive systems actually look like. So we have the male reproductive system, and you'll remember from our lecture last time about the excretory system, how we have the bladder, and the bladder actually goes into the urethra, which is here. But the most important part when we're talking about reproduction, we have the testes, we have a bunch of things here. One of the things is called the vas deferens. If, for instance, you go get a vasectomy, so I doubt any of you are going to do that, but if you get a vasectomy, they'll actually cut that vas deferens so the sperm can't actually get up there. So all the sperm is produced here in the testes, goes up the vas deferens, and then goes into the urethra, but it goes down like a different hole. It's hard to explain. But then obviously that's kind of how that works. I'm not gonna go into that too much because you'll learn a bit about that in PE. I'll leave that to them. But that's what the male reproductive system looks like. The most important part is the testes and I guess the urethra, really, as well as the vas deferens. Those things are really important. Okay, this is the female reproductive system. So kind of similar in the sense that we have this ball that produces our sex cells. We have the fallopian tube. Now, the fallopian tube is kind of like the vas deferens over here. They're kind of similar. There are similarities and there's differences. So when a female reaches puberty, they'll start to go through the releasing of their eggs. And this is why a period happens or a menstrual cycle happens. So the ovary produces the egg pops up into here into the fallopian tube, and it kind of just hangs there for a bit. Then what happens is it'll hop in here and it'll sort of wait for sperm. If sperm comes, then it will fertilize the egg, it'll attach to the uterus, and that's where the baby is born. Okay? Obviously, the vagina is the cavity in which the penis goes into. I'm not going to explain that much more than that, but you need to know how they kind of work. Okay, so ovary produces the egg goes in the fallopian tube, egg stays around the fallopian tube. If it gets fertilized, it goes into the uterus. If it's very lucky, it hangs onto the uterus lining and it stays there and it produces a baby over time, which eventually has to get pushed out through the cervix, out through the vagina. That's kind of how it works. Okay? You are more than welcome to research more of that in your own time, but I'm not going to do it right here. All right. So just like with all the other ones, I try to give you a disease associated with each one. This time we're going to talk about cancer. Now the word cancer gets thrown away a lot, despite there being lots of different kinds of cancers. Okay? Generally speaking, cancer is where a cell continues to divide uncontrollably, where it should just get to a certain spot and then stop. So best example I can give of this is like I have hair on my hands, right? Now, if I were to shave that again, if I were to shave that, it would get back to this same set point. It doesn't do it for the hair on my head or your head because it works slightly differently. But in cancer, what would happen if my hair was a cancer sort of thing, it would just continue to grow and I'd have like this little mound of hair growing off my hand, and I don't really want that. In cancer of the body, though, there's like an uncontrollable division of cells, which causes a big clump of cells to form at a particular part. We don't want that. Imagine if you had a clump of cells impinging on like an artery or a vein or a nerve. If that happened on a nerve, there's every possibility that if this is my hand and I get a cancer right here, for example, and it impinges on the nerve there, that I can't feel any of this, which can be troublesome because if someone's chopping off my arm for whatever reason, that's not a good thing. I want to be able to feel that so I can go, oh, that's not good. But yeah, if the lump's big enough, you might find that you're not getting enough blood to a particular part of your body that needs it. There's a couple of different things. We're not going to go into depth with it. It's just that you know about it. Cancer can generally spread, and it generally is associated with getting older as our cells and our DNA start to degrade. And it kind of happens after about 25. Stuff just goes downhill health-wise, and cancer can result as such. Now, as medicine has gotten better over time, our propensity to get cancer has sort of increased. And that doesn't necessarily revolve around eating healthy, doing all those sorts of things. It's just that we're getting older and we're not naturally sort of supposed to live that long. But because we're so good at medicine and understanding our bodies, at least we're getting there, we're able to live longer, but it also means we're more susceptible to cancer. This is an example of a dude with cancer, had a massive, massive watermelon-sized tumor just hanging there. Like, imagine living with that your entire life. He's very lucky that it wasn't somewhere else where it was actually doing like a big chunk of damage to him. But you can see he's just got it cut off, and now he looks kind of normal. Now, there's every possibility that there's a clump of cells there that aren't programmed correctly, and he could get that again. It might be unlikely, but it's also a possibility. So when people get cancer, they tend to continue getting cancer, and it's not the best feeling in the world, I imagine. I don't know the most about it in the world, but yeah, it can be very, very, very stressful for people that get cancer because they tend to go into remission, which means all the cancer's gone. And then a couple of years later, they're like, oh no, it's back. So something to keep in mind there. All right, to wrap everything up, mitosis, meiosis, two different processes for different reasons. Mitosis, there so that we can grow, maintain, and repair damaged parts of our body. So if I get cut, my body's going to go through mitosis until it's fixed. In meiosis, it's so that I can create viable and varied offspring. Mitosis happens in all of the regular cells in our body, and meiosis happens in the sex cells of our genitals. Okay, so the sex organs of our genitals, which is the testes or the ovaries. And that's it. That is basically body systems. Now, next week, we're going to go in and we're going to do those dissections, which will be really cool. Hopefully, get a lot out of them. If you're watching this from home and maybe you don't even know who I am, I hope you've enjoyed watching these. I hope they've helped at all. If you have any questions, I'm going to actually enable comments on these videos so I can answer questions. But yeah, I hope that's helped. Yeah, good luck with everything. I might, if there's enough, if there's enough support for it, I'll continue doing these. But yeah, they're sort of there just for you. Okay. See you later. Let's get this off. There we go. Bye.